So what I'd like to do now is to go through some PowerPoint slides that I've put together on these aspects of the book. And I'd like to start with the Bible Project video on the book of Job to give us a quick overview of the book of Job. And the Bible Project begins by saying that this is a unique book, but at the same time, it sits alongside Proverbs and Ecclesiastes as wisdom literature. So the book of Job's divided into bookends, chapter 1 to 2 and chapter 43, that have similarities. So you got a prologue at the beginning and then epilogue at the end. And your assignments may have a nice little introduction and conclusion there. And so, yeah, Book of Job's got that beginning and end to it. And then chapter 3 to 37, we've got the three friends. And then chapter 38 through to 41, we've got God's response to Job and his friends. So the structure is important. The book of Job begins with Job being blameless, righteous, honouring God. And then we have a courtroom scene, and I've suggested that the courtroom could be like the end of life when we do face a courtroom. And whenever you have a challenge in life and a trial in life or a disappointment in life, it's like a mini courtroom opportunity where you can actually become a lot wiser through the trials of life. And so one of the benefits of the trials of life is that it can make you quite a bit wiser. It's not so much about all of the answers to the problem of evil, but it's about questions of the justice of God and where is God and how God runs the world and how we respond to that. And then we see some pastoral care examples that we could look at further. So there's Job's wife. I think husbands and wives are wonderful because they offer this pastoral care to one another. You know nothing. What do you mean I know? Have you ever seen husbands and wives? And I think they can be wonderfully caring to one another. But yeah, interesting journey, husbands and wives. There is the honeymoon period, but then there's the other periods in the journey of life. And I think that reminds us that in any relationship, there are good moments and spring, summer times, and then there are autumn, winter times, and then you come through those. So that's part of the irony of life is husbands and wives and how they relate. And then there are, and so Job's wife's got a nice piece of advice: curse God and die. And then we've got the three friends, Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, and they each represent certain aspects of ancient Near East thinking and wisdom. And I think there's great insights. That is, you can read the book of Job for these great insights. There's three cycles, chapter 3 to 14, the first cycle, where there's a presentation. And then after that, there are questions about the justice of God and how the world is run and how the Proverbs advise us. And then cycle 2, chapters 15 to 21, and cycle 3, 22 to 28. So Job speaks in each case and the friends answer. And notice that this is very much like a courtroom. And so here we can look over our lives and we can see that there are good moments, tragic moments, and our friends could step in and say, this is how you should look at them. And then if they're really wise friends, they could say, these are some wise suggestions there. One of the big assumptions is the book of Proverbs telling us that human actions, when you are wise and do good, you'll have success. And when you are evil and stupid, then disaster will come. And I think that is so true. I think as Christians, we should be wise about finances, should be wise about relationships, should be wise about the life journey, education. There's information out there. And as Christians, we should be wise there. And I think most religious people and Christian people tend to look to wisdom rather than just wasting life. But I think we're all human, and so all people can have challenging moments. And then Job, however, responds in verses 3 to 28 and says, hang on, what about my life? I'm innocent and my suffering is not fitting in with what's happening. So I think there are always moments in life a bit like that. I remember once I was teaching a class and I'd had a toothache and I went to the doctor, the dentist, and he said, that'll be $300, come back in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time when I can fit you in. So I went back in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time when he could fit me in. And he said, oh, I meant to say 3,500. We're going to do a root canal or something like that. And I thought, I don't have 3,500. So I came back to the class and I'm teaching away. And I said to the students, what do I do? And then someone said, you know, this student is actually a dental student at Griffith Uni. And so I went to Griffith Uni and they took an x-ray of my mouth. And I said, you not only got one there that needs working on, you got one here that needs working on, you got something here. But we'll do the whole lot, you know, about 2 root canals and whatever for about $1,000. And so I thought, wow, you know, so irony and irony, you know, it's, and so, and I guess life's a bit like that. You can find things are worse than you think and things are better than you think. And you can have these little answers to prayer. So Job comes along when he says, how come everything's so sad and difficult? And the argument goes that God is just, and all 3 friends say God is just, and God runs the world. And then, as you've said, and Abby said, as that surely when things go wrong, we tend to think we've sinned, and we do think that. We when you get the flu or something, you tend to think, what have I done wrong? Have I not eaten the vitamin C? Have I, you know, did I eat a piece of my dinner that had dropped on the floor and I picked it up and ate it when I shouldn't have, you know, because I didn't do the 10-second rule or whatever. And so there's all of these questions that we can ask ourselves when things don't go well. And Job's statement and irony tells us that life doesn't just work out that way. And so the book of Job has these ironies in it that point out that life is more complex. And I think the whole book of Job is a huge irony, is that it didn't go so well. So Job gives an answer from chapter 31 onward, where he speaks to God, and he says, now Job's friend, a 4th friend now comes in verse 32 to 37, Elihu, and this gets a bit better for us. In chapter 32 to 37, Elihu, a younger friend, shows up and says, God might use pain and suffering to build character and to teach people, and this could be very valuable. You could become a better person and through this. So suffering may be a warning. Suffering may build character. There could be benefits. So I think that's a better answer that Elihu brings. I'm much happier with that. And also Elihu says, don't just attack God and say he's wrong. Don't give up on God. And so Elihu's answer is given there. Then we come to chapter 38 and 39, where God speaks to Job and says, the cosmos is much bigger. I remember I was in a class like this. I was a student like you, and the lecturer was talking about God's got everything in control. And I put my hand up and I said, sir, don't you think God and Jesus should have done the universe this way? And the lecturer laughed. He said, here you are, sort of age 30, advising God to how to run the entire universe. He said, oh, yeah, I could dine out on this for a while. This is pretty good. And Job's a bit the same, facing God here. Where are you when God makes all the foundations of the earth and makes it all work? And so really we've got to admit that looking at the natural world around, it's pretty large, it's pretty huge. There's all sorts of complexities in it. And we, like Job or others, would like to micromanage the world. So we get blessed and all that give us trouble get a bit of pain, and that's how we'd like the world to work out. But the world's not like that. We need to be more mature, and we need to accept what God has given in the world. And so we then see in chapter 40 through to 41, there's two huge monsters, and they could be like the crocodile or like the rhinoceros. There's some big dangerous animals out there, and there's also a sense of disorder and danger. So if you go out in the middle of a cyclone or something, chances are you might get hurt. So watch out. It's a big world. It's a bit dangerous. And if you swim with sharks, then watch out. That's a bit dangerous as well. Now, Job in chapter 40, God says to him, hey, if you were to run the world and make it all balanced and perfect, then I think it wouldn't work out so well. So you've got to accept that we live in a complex world, and you've got to accept it as it is. So the question is not so much why is there suffering in the world, or if it is, the answer is that we live in a very big, complex world in which there's a huge amount happening. And in many ways, God has blessed you and given you a lot, whatever you have, and you could count your blessings. The world is not just good. There are imperfections in it along the way. It's not just ordered. There's a wildness to it. It's not just beautiful. There's danger to it, because it's a big, complex world that God has given us and has made. And so we should be humble. We should repent. We should allow God to work out his good purposes as we go through this world. And we should recognize God can use us to bring good in the world around us. Now, in the end, God honors Job and says, it's good that you spoke. It's good that you prayed. It's good that you lamented. It's good that you brought your complaints to us, to the complaint center of heaven. And in all of this, God says, you are to be honored. And Job prays for his friends. And so there's a blessing that comes. So really the book of Job does encourage us to pray, to lament, to pour ourselves out, to admit the struggles that we go through, and to recognize that there is a lot of good happening in life. And like the Psalms, rejoice because good things will happen. So the book of Job shows the value of wisdom. Yes, do the right thing like Proverbs, but it won't always work out that way. The value of observing the natural world. Yes, do look at what's out there, get an education. But also the reality of suffering, sickness and hurt. Things will disappoint you. Freedom and agency, subjectivity and growth all require this. The value of grace, love and forgiveness, because God's going to show that as a loving parent to you, show it to love to one another like Jesus does. The value of mystery and the complexity of life, and the power of God and prayer. So that is the book of Job. Klein's commentary on Job is particularly useful, and so you could have a look at Klein's commentary that talks about there's not only bright, happy daytimes in life's journey, there's tragedy and darkness and nighttime. So accept that. There's complication in life. It's not all simple, but there is hope and joy. God can work things out for good. But the irony is sometimes the best times in life is when tragedy comes and things don't go so well, and when you lose something. That could be the best thing that happens in life. So going around briefly, people online and yourselves, what are your thoughts on the book of Job and this huge challenge of tragedy and difficulty? Yeah, what's the answer to the big problem of life? Is irony an answer, or what's the answer? Thoughts? And while you're thinking, we'll ask Abby and Matthew. Abby, your thoughts on what the answer is to the big problem of life?
Oh, gosh. The answer to the big problem in life, I don't know if I have one, but certainly I have a newfound love for the book of Job. It was all very big and confusing. in previous readings of it, but I feel like I can tackle it a little bit more now. And I think the main thing that I've taken away, like what is the big answer, is that, why Job says in chapter 2, why should we accept good from God and not trouble? Just because we don't understand our present circumstances doesn't mean that it's not ordered. And the prayer is really important. Yeah.
I love that. Why should we accept good and not trouble? That gives us a bit of a balance to life, doesn't it? And flat tire occasionally on the car, but we've also got the car which goes. Yeah. Thoughts on Job and the problem of life? One piece of advice would be go to counselling, express yourself. The government have said that they allow some counselling sessions in these COVID times for that very reason, is that sometimes you're wrestling with things, but when you lay it out on the table to a counsellor and say, I'm having this difficulty and that difficulty, and I've lost my job and I've lost this, and I invested in this, and so laying it out, at least you can lay it out. So I think that this is a pro-counselling book. Thoughts on what stands out? And certainly, I think whenever good things happen, we tend to just smile and drive along without thinking. But when bad things happen, we do ask questions and look more deeply into everything that's going on. And we think, what's the purpose of my life? What are the things that are here? What's happening? And so we do reevaluation when challenges happen. Matthew, what are your thoughts about the challenge of Job?
Yeah, I think I've just noticed an irony with the question about whereabouts. You see in that very first chapter, when Satan turns up in the court, where have you come from? I think when trouble arises in our life, it's like, where did this come from, is the question we ask. And there's a flipping of, a human response is, well, where are you, God? And then the irony is that God flips the question in 38, because he goes on to say, well, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? And so it's this big circular argument, but about just where this stuff comes from. Where is God? But also, where were we when God kicked all this off? So it's kind of like he kind of trumps the human question with a far greater question from a very top-down point of view, which just kind of, you've got no rebuttal from there on.
Yeah. Now, some people call this existentialism, in that it's about the big questions. That is, we've got our 90 years and we come to God and say, Lord, I'm very concerned about the 90 years. And God says, well, hang on, I'm working with a 13.7 billion year project here. you got to fit in with me a little bit, and or with a 4 or 6,000 year, whatever, a big project that he's working with. And existentialism says that sometimes we need to think about these big perspectives. And so God has trumped this with a greater question, saying, hey, there's a sense of order and purpose that I'm working with that's much bigger than you understand when you're thinking about the next 3 weeks before you go on holiday or something like that. It's so I really like what you say there, Matthew. That's really good. So one of the things we learn from Job is the value of listening. So we bring ourselves, embodied people, and our experiences and a little bit of wisdom, and we come alongside people. So I think it's important to be real, authentic, and to be there for people. I think it's important to give room for lament. So people do feel sad, and so let them be themselves. A couple of scholarly resources that I've drawn on. One is Neil Pembroke, who has written quite a few resources on pastoral care, and he teaches at the University of Queensland in pastoral care and biblical studies. And he summarises some scholars who've described the benefits that flow from the lament tradition. And he says this gives opportunity in lament to express all of these Kubler-Ross feelings of anger, frustration, puzzlement. And Pembroke says this is essential for the suffering person in that they want to be real and honest and alive and to work it out, to think things through for themselves. And we have to be careful not to disempower people by taking away their agency and opportunity for response. In biblical studies, Walter Brueggemann has written on lament, and he's written about Psalms of lament that show the biblical authors valued giving people opportunity and support to reflect on disappointment and challenges of life and to work through for themselves their answers that they're looking for. Brueggemann says that an authentic prayer and worship gives an opportunity to be open and honest about the negative aspects of life, and that many people have trouble when we don't give them opportunity to express themselves. It's important to have liminal space where you can express the challenges that you're going through. And liminal space describes that space between the different spaces, like the liminal area of a door that we go through on the journey. The value of lament reminds us of the psychological and emotional and the physical value of giving expression to our disappointments and doubts in life. And so we should, in pastoral care, encourage people to have opportunity for lament, as well as that we should see the value of dialogue with people, but it needs to be careful, thoughtful dialogue. I think when talking with someone who's struggling, you can fall into dialogue that's teachy or preachy when they're wanting someone to be alongside them, encouraging them. So the friend's argument was that God rewards the righteous, punishes the evil, so you'll do well if you do right. But that's not the only thing going on. The friends conclude that the Job must have problems in his life. And I guess that's true of everyone we see in difficulty. If you see someone that's a bit poor, you tend to think, hey, they mustn't be doing good things with their finance or work or whatever. We forget that that can just be the season that they're facing that's different to our season. Another thing we learn from Job is the value of prayer. So if I were you, I would appeal to God. I would lay my cause before him. So this reminds us of the value of crying out to God. And I think church does provide great opportunity every week. It's almost like a free counselling session where you come along in church in prayer and worship, and it gives you opportunity. So let's run around the class now and think about what are some of the practical helps that we can offer people when they face difficulty. So in terms of practical help when people suffer, what would be 1, 2, or 3 things that you could offer. So any thoughts? So someone's suffering next to you, if you were to offer them some advice, then what would be the advice? Yeah. Yep, thinking. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes. And the not judging, I think, is a real challenging one, because we do see someone whose life's a bit of a mess, and we feel as though we can offer them so much practical advice. You know, if you've done this, if you've done that, you should. But that's not really what they're looking for. They want a safe place where they can share where they're at. Abby, your thoughts on practical help that we can offer when people suffer?
Yeah, I was thinking about listening well as well. I also thought just meeting people where they are currently at, because that's what God does for us. He's not afraid to literally come down to earth. I think that's like, I guess it encourages, again, a safe space, that you're willing to speak to them where they're at that point, and not expecting anything of them.
Yeah, so important to offer that safe space, isn't it, where they can express themselves, that they are not going to be judged through what they say. Yeah, and then also praying with people can be very valuable. And so in pastoral care, often if you ask people, can I pray with you, then you'll find that they will be very open to that quite often. Even people in the last days, months of their life, I've had the opportunity to pray with some like that, and they really value prayer, and also you giving them opportunity to pray as well. And prayer recognizes that God is actively involved in our lives, and that He can work things out well. Also, we can read that passage which says, blessed is the one whom God corrects. So seeing the value of correction is another lesson that we learn from Job. He wounds, but he also binds up. So seeing that God can bring healing, and healing can come with time. Healing can come with an openness to God. At times, a person will feel that their friend's advice is rubbish. In chapter 13, verse 12, your advice, your maxims, your proverbs are proverbs of ash. So there's not much there. So Job cries out to God to show that if he sinned, teach me and I'll be quiet. Show me that I have done wrong, he says. So Job longs for a mediator to stand between him and God. And then in the New Testament, we do find that mediator in Christ Jesus. So in the New Testament, there are answers to the challenges that Job faces. One of the things that I pointed out was that there is chiasms in some of the sections of Job, and the whole book of Job has a chiasm around chapter 28, which talks about like silver, wisdom is to be found by digging deep. And so I think the book of Job encourages us to dig deep. And you find that it begins with a prologue, ends with an epilogue, and then it has an opening lament and a closing lament. It has dialogues and monologues. So there is a pattern to the whole book. And so Job 28 reminds us that we need to search the dark areas in life in order to find the deepest understanding of life. The other thing that stands out is the law court scenes. So the cases have been laid out, and then at the end, things are judged. And one of the encouragements that I get from Job is to judge one's own life in order that you might have a better life, and that you might do better. So occasionally, like going to counselling, it can be like a law court where things are judged to see if they're sound. And then finally, God speaks. So be open to the voice of God, in that God brings new perspectives, fresh perspectives. In Job 41:4, the Lord said, "Shall the one who contends with the Almighty rebuke God?" So the only answer is to be quiet before God. Like a law court, we don't come to necessarily accuse the judge, although sometimes we feel like saying that. Rather, we should come to listen to the judge. There's similarities here to Mark 4, that is hearing, seeing, not listening. The challenge here is to be hearing, seeing, and listening. Similarities to Ezekiel, which speaks about those who don't hear and see, and also to the book of Revelation, which by its very word means revelation, God speaking. 1 Corinthians 13 says we only see dimly, someday we'll see face to face, and the book of Job reminds us of that. One of the key verses, I think, is Job 19, which says, "I know that my Redeemer lives and he will stand upon the earth." And so there is hope, resurrection hope, future hope in the book of Job. It's a hope-filled book. There's loving parental concern in the book of Job, so it's trusting in God, who's like a loving parent. There's also a thought that Job is a theologian of the cross who talks about suffering. And so the cross is the big irony. That is, Jesus lives a perfect life. He goes to the cross. However, this is going to be the great turnaround in life. If you live a righteous life, then that can be turned around. And so Jesus has confidence in God to turn life around. So Job loses his confidence in what he says, in what friends say, and in the end, his only confidence is in God and what God is going to do. The reality of Job's suffering is that he thought at the beginning it was about how good a life he lived. In the end, he realizes that it's what God is doing in the world that is most important, and he needs to know about that. Having a close relationship with God helps in suffering. So St. John of the Cross provides a summary of Job, and we realize that we don't have much to offer. It's how we trust in God that really counts. So can I get everyone to write down now? I'll stop the recording and start it again in 3 or 4 minutes. And can I get you to write down, what are some things that have stood out to you in today's class, where we've looked at irony, the nature of irony, value of irony, not just being something contrary to what we think. A beautiful day when it's pouring with rain isn't just making a joke, it's thinking more deeply about beauty and rain. What have we learned today about irony? What have we learned about Soren Kierkegaard's thought that we only really know about life and what it's about through irony? What have we learned today through the book of Job when we go through suffering and we express some ironic thoughts there? So can I get everyone to write down now, what are 3 or 4 things that you've learned through today's class on irony and the book of Job? And we could have spent some more time in the parables of the New Testament, where Jesus shares about the great turnarounds of life. In Matthew 5, he talks about blessed are you when you're poor, when you struggle. So there's blessings at that times. There's irony in some of the statements of Jesus, because he's showing that sometimes our proud, religious, external ways really aren't that solid and well-founded, whereas sometimes our humility before God and the complexity of life are much better off. So we'll come back in a few moments and ask you to reconnect, and we'll have a look at your review of what we've learned today.